Good afternoon, everyone. I am Daniel Rodriguez, together with Ma'am Flor Maybares, Ma'am Nicole Angeline Tangilon, and Sir John Ivan Barameda. We are assigned to discuss the Module 7, Norse Mythology, which talks about the story of Sigurd the Vosung. But before we proceed to our discussion, we prepared here our learning objectives. So at the end of this lesson, or this module, the student should be able to A. To read and interpret myth and some of the ways their functions in societies and cultures. B. To read and interpret mythic metaphor symbols and analogies. C. To discover what these truths have to do with our lives today. So let's come now to definition of terms na kung saan nakikita natin or mai-encountered natin along with our modules or along with our discussions for today. So first we have here the Norse, which Norse is the Norwegian language, especially in its medieval form. Second is pagan. It is a person holding religious beliefs other than those of the main world religions. Next is Vikings, were seafaring riders, conquerors, explorers, settlers, and traders who ventured throughout much of the world during the Viking Age. So that's our definition of terms. So let's come now to our discussion. So kung merong Greek, Romance, and Celtic mythology, we also have Norse mythology. So Norse or Scandinavian mythology is the body of myth of the North Germanic people, stemming from Norse paganism and continuing after Christianization of Scandinavia and into the Scandinavian folklore of the modern period. Norse mythology consists of tales of various deities, beings, and heroes derived from numerous sources from both before and after the pagan period, including medieval manuscript, archaeological representations, and folk tradition. So, yung Norse, or also called Scandinavian mythology, are the body of Germanic people, or body of myth of Germanic people, and it also consists, or parang nilalaman ng Norse mythology na ito, ang mga tales ng mga various deities, beings, and heroes derived from numerous sources from both before and after the pagan period. And Norse mythology also provides reliable, well-documented information on the entrailing mythology and religions of the Norse and other Germanic people. Before the Norse converted to Christianity during Middle Ages, they had their own vibrant native pagan religions that was harshly beautiful as the Nordic landscape, of to which it was intimately connected. The centerpiece of the religion was what we'll call today Norse mythology and set, which is the set of religious stories and gave meaning to the Vikings' life. Who were the Norse people? The term Norse is commonly applied to pre-Christian Northern Germanic peoples living in the Scandinavia during the so-called Viking Age. So, yung Norse people daw po is, they are a pre-Christian Northern Germanic people living in the Scandinavia during the so-called Viking Age. Next is, who were the Vikings? Vikings is an Old Norse term that refers to the seafaring warriors who goes on some sort of expedition abroad. The word is commonly used to refer the Norsemen of the 8th to the mid-11th centuries who traded with, invaded, and or explored places outside their own territories. So, the Vikings, in other term or simple word, they are the explorers na kung saan they explored places outside their territories.
Hi everyone, so we come up now to know who were the Who were the Norse myth makers? So, sino nga ba sila? Sinasabing hindi alam kung sino ang original na gumawa ng Norse myth. Pero, isang Danish historian na si Saxo Grammaticus ay isang major redactor of Germanic myths, kasali na rin ang Norse myth. So, we do not know who the original Norse myth makers were. We do know that the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus was a major redactor of Germanic myths, including the Norse myths. Composers of the 13th century Vosung saga provide us with much of the heroic material of Norse mythology, the story of Sigurd, for example. Alamin naman natin kung ano ang Norse mythology. Ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin nito? So, ang Norse mythology is the term applied of the mythology of Scandinavia in the pre-Christian period, when Old Norse was the common language. The primary sources of mythology as we know it now were the 13th century old manuscripts of the Norse in Iceland. Earlier origins obviously existed, but they are unknown, as the Old Norse people, like the Celts, passed down their myths orally rather than in writing. The 13th century texts were corrupted by the fact that the writers were Christian rather than believers in the old pagan religion. Christianity was slow to achieve hegemony in Scandinavia, however, so the writers of the mythology were relatively close in the time to the tradition of which they wrote. It was only in the year 1000 that the Icelandic assembly voted to replace the old religion with Christianity. The 11th century German historian Adam of Bremen reported sacrifices to the Norse god Odin at the Great Temple in Uppland as late as 1070. Who was Snorri Sturluson? Sino nga ba siya? So, Snorri Sturluson was an Icelandic landowner, chieftain, historian, politician, and a poet who brought up in families steeped in Icelandic traditions and lore. He became an expert on ancient poetry known as skaldic verse. So, skalds were bards, the Philid of the North, and on Norse myths. His expertise was fully revealed in his masterful work, the Prose Edda, based on an older work, the Poetic Edda. Snorri's goal was to encourage Icelandic poets to remember the myths and poetic methods of skaldic poetry. What was the Norse cosmology? So, as perceived by the ancient North Germanic peoples, Norse cosmology is the study of cosmos or cosmology. Norse cosmology focuses on how Norse people perceive the cosmos and their place in it. It included their creation myths, the 9 realms of the universe, and their perception of the inevitable end of both humanity and the gods in the form of Ragnarok. Additional, the cosmology of Norse cosmology is the places in which the action occurs and their arrangement, you could say, is primarily an invisible spiritual other world, although it overlaps with the Vikings' physical worlds in a few cases. The Norse cosmology share much common with the cosmologies of other Northern Eurasian traditions, but it presents a unique take on those shared patterns. So may pagkakapareha daw ang Norse cosmology sa other cosmologies ng Northern Eurasian tradition. Next is, we come up now to the role of the tricksters in Norse mythology. So what role do they play in Norse mythology? So the tricksters of all cultures tends to have several characteristics in common. They can change in shapes, they have access to the dead, they possess magical powers, and they can cast spells. They have large appetites of all kinds. they are amoral, and they are both creative and destructive. So sinasabing ang mga tricksters daw tends to fool around. They can be your friends or your enemies. They sometimes helps others to get out of trouble. Most of the time, they are the reason why others are in trouble.
The Vosung Saga. A saga is literally something sad, that is, a story or history. The Vosung Saga is the story of the legendary mythological Vosung family, of which the two most important heroes are Sigmund and his son Sigurd. Siegfried in Germany. The Vosung Saga is a 13th century prose epic-like tale based on a much older material. Essentially, the same tale is told in Germany as the Nibelung opera lovers will recognize the tale in Richard Wagner's opera cycle, known as The Ring des Nibelungen or The Ring of the Nibelungen. King Sigmund was a direct descendant of the god Odin. Sigurd, a son of Odin, had a son named Riril, who became king of Hunaland. Riril's wife became pregnant in a miraculous manner, and after a 6 years pregnancy produced the hero Volsung. Cut from his mother's dying body, Volsung was born already well grown. He became king and married Lijon, who produced many children as well. The oldest of whom was Sigmund and his twin sister, Signy. When visiting king, Sigurd asked for Signy's hand in marriage. Volsung agreed. In spite of Signy's unwillingness, Volsung had built a fine palace with a great tree named Barnstock at its axis. During Sigurd's visits, a hooded old man with one eye, a favored get disguise of the one-eyed god Odin, pressed a sword, the Norse Mythology 7, named Gram, into the tree, promising it to anyone who could remove it. Of all the would-be heroes of the court of Volsung, only Sigmund was able to remove the sword, thus proving himself to be a true hero in the archetypal sense. This situation, of course, bringing us to mind the story of the king Arthur of pulling the sword from the rock. When Sigurd demanded to buy the sword, Sigmund refuses offer, mortally offending the visiting king and beginning a feud, and eventually a war that would decimate the Volsung. Sigmund and his sister Signy succeeded in avenging the slaughter of most of their family. Before his death, Sigmund Jarvis, who gave birth to Sigurd. At Sigmund's death, the sword Gram was broken into 2 pieces.
The story of Sigurd. Sigurd was the greatest of the Norse heroes. In the Volsung saga, he is the last of the Volsung, the son of Sigmund. He was brought up into the court of a foster father, Regin. Regin had a brother, Fafnir, who had killed their father and stolen his gold. The gold was cursed, and after the thief, Fafnir had transformed himself into a venomous dragon. From that on he had, as did so many mythic dragons, jealously guarded his treasure in his lair and caused havoc in the surrounding countryside. Meanwhile, Sigurd foster father Regin taught his charge the lessons of nobility and the mystery of France. When he thought the boy was ready and strong enough, Regin urged him to confront and kill Fafnir. Sigurd agreed to do so only if Regin would force the magnificent sword from him, or for him. After 2 blades were proven to be unsatisfactory, Sigurd instructed the smith to make a blade out of the broken parts of his father's sword Gram. When Regin refashioned it, it cut easily through the anvil itself. So after that, Sigurd now agreed to face Fafnir once he had avenged his own father's death. This he had did and then returned to Regin and prepared to fulfill his promise. On the heath where Fafnir lived, Sigurd and Regin found a track leading from the watering hole to the dragon's lair. Regin instructed Sigurd to dig a trench across this track and to wait in it until the beast passed over it, allowing Sigurd to thrust his sword into its belly and heart. When Sigurd asked what would happen to him if he became submerged in the dragon's blood, Regin accused him of cowardice and left. Trusting Regin, Sigurd was digging the trench when an old hooded greybeard appeared and warned him that he would need to dig more than one trench so that the blood could be diverted from him into the main trench. The old man then vanished. Once again, the young hero had been helped by his divine ancestors, Uden. Much as in the Greek monster slaying myth of Perseus, the hero had received divine advice. When the dying Fafnir asked who had slain him and why, Sigurd foolishly revealed his identity, thus allowing the dragon to pass the curse of the gold onto him. Sigurd did not fear death, however, and so determined to take the gold anyway. With his evil brothers safely put to rest, Regin reappeared and made demands. Sigurd could keep the treasure, but he wanted the dragon's heart. Sigurd agreed to this. The Regin drank some of the serpent blood and fell into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, Sigurd began roasting the dragon heart for his foster father. He burned his finger in the process and put his finger into his mouth to ease the pain. When he tasted the dragon blood, he suddenly found himself able to understand the speech of birds who told him that Regin planned to kill him. So Sigurd drew Gram once more and dissipated Regin. The rest of the saga described tragic events surrounding a ring given to the shield maiden, Brynhild by Sigurd, and the confused demands of love and treasures that eventually led Sigurd's death as well as to the death of Brynhild. So that is the story of the Sigurd. To sum up, mythologies are certainly expressions of a particular person or people, but they are far from only that. There tends to be a spark of something more timeless and universal in them as well.